John Kennedy faced a threat from Elizabeth Warren and responded with a single, decisive sentence. The Senate chamber was tense, charged with unspoken rivalries and quiet anticipation. Polished mahogany desks reflected the soft glow of chandeliers, each occupied by senators whose eyes shifted between notes, tablets, and one another, sensing the tension building. The session aimed to discuss the allocation of disaster relief funds, a matter of urgent importance for millions still recovering from catastrophic floods, especially in Louisiana. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat at his desk, posture relaxed, yet his sharp blue eyes scanned the room with the alertness of someone seasoned by both literal and political storms. His hands rested lightly on a stack of papers, fingers tapping in rhythm, revealing nothing of the fire simmering within. Kennedy was no stranger to heated Senate debates, but nothing could have prepared anyone for the confrontation about to erupt. As the chamber settled, a sharp screech broke the silence, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Senator Elizabeth Warren rose, her presence commanding attention, eyes blazing with intensity. She clutched a thick file, knuckles white, and her voice cut through the room. "Senator Kennedy," she began, her tone laced with accusation, "the American people deserve answers. Why have you stayed silent while Louisiana suffers after these floods? While families lose their homes, livelihoods, and loved ones? Or are your political alliances more important than the people you pledged to serve?" A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Senators froze, pens suspended over notes, as her words landed like gunfire. Reporters in the gallery leaned forward, fingers already flying across keyboards, drafting headlines. Warren's words were more than criticism. They were a calculated strike, meant to embarrass Kennedy in front of colleagues, the press, and the nation watching live on C-SPAN. Social media was already alight with hashtags dissecting every line of her attack. Warren pressed on, slamming the file onto her desk, the sound echoing like thunder. "You've been silent, Senator Kennedy, while communities in your state pleaded for help. Silent while children drank contaminated water due to failed infrastructure. Silent while entire towns were destroyed by floods that proper funding could have mitigated. Is your loyalty to your party so blinding that you've forgotten the people who elected you?" A few allies applauded, their claps sharp and deliberate. The rest of the chamber, however, remained eerily quiet. All eyes turned to Kennedy. Would he waver? Would he deflect? Cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression, every flicker of his gaze. Kennedy did not flinch. His face was calm, almost serene, as if he were on a Louisiana porch rather than under a political ambush. Beneath that composed exterior, though, something stirred, an unshakable resolve. Memories came flooding back, wading through knee-deep water in Baton Rouge, boots soaked, heart heavy, listening to families recount their losses. He saw the face of Mary, an elderly woman whose home had been destroyed. Her trembling hands held his as she recounted the loss of her grandson to the floodwaters. Kennedy had been there not for cameras, but in quiet moments when despair hung heavy in the air. He had held hands, offered reassurances, and carried the weight of these stories back to Washington. And now, Warren accused him of abandoning the very people he had vowed to support. The boldness of it stung, yet he remained silent, waiting. Warren pressed on, her voice rising. "Answer the question, Senator Kennedy," she demanded, finger pointed, eyes narrowing. "Why have you stayed silent while your constituents suffer? Why have you failed to hold accountable those mismanaging relief funds? Or is it easier to stay quiet and protect your political allies?" The chamber was tense, the air heavy with pressure. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching like insects. Some senators shifted uneasily, sensing Warren was taking a calculated risk. She counted on Kennedy's reputation as a folksy, understated figure, a man of charm and quips, not confrontation. She expected him to deflect with a joke or sidestep her attack with his southern wit. She had misjudged. Kennedy understood this was not about him personally. It was about the people of Louisiana, families still living in trailers, children drinking bottled water because taps ran brown. It was about truth, and he would not let theatrics bury it. Slowly, deliberately, Kennedy rose. The chamber went silent, anticipation thick in the air. He adjusted his tie, a small gesture that grounded him, and took a steady breath. His eyes locked on Warren's, calm and unwavering. When he spoke, his voice was low and firm, carrying the weight of someone unshaken by grandstanding. "Senator Warren," he said, each word deliberate, "where were you when the people of Louisiana were pleading for help in the floodwaters while you attended Georgetown dinner parties?" The silence that followed was profound. It was as if the room itself had paused. A pin fell to the floor, its sound echoing in the stillness. A reporter gasped, hand covering her mouth. Warren's face went pale, lips parting as if to reply, but no words came. Her hands trembled on the desk for support. The chamber remained frozen, every eye on her, waiting for a response that never came. Kennedy's words were not merely a rebuttal. They were precise, exposing a reality everyone in the room knew. Warren had not been to Louisiana during the floods. Not once. While Kennedy had walked through devastated neighborhoods, listening to survivors, and pledging action, Warren had been hundreds of miles away, attending high-profile fundraisers with elite donors in Washington, D.C. The cameras captured it all: Warren's stunned expression, Kennedy's steady gaze, and senators exchanging looks of disbelief. Social media erupted as clips of Kennedy's single sentence went viral. Hashtags like #KennedySlams, #Warren, and #LouisianaTruth trended within minutes, with users expressing shock and admiration. One tweet read, accompanied by a clip of Warren's frozen face, "Kennedy just spoke for every forgotten American." Another said, "Warren thought she could intimidate him. She wasn't prepared." In the chamber, the impact was clear. A few of Warren's allies leaned in, whispering, urging her to respond. But she remained rooted, her notes untouched. She flipped through her file as if seeking a lifeline, but her hands shook, betraying her unease. Kennedy, meanwhile, did not gloat. He sat back down, hands calmly folded on his desk, eyes never leaving Warren. There was no anger in his expression, only the quiet resolve of a man speaking a truth long ignored. Behind him, a young staffer wiped away a tear, moved by the moment. She had family in Louisiana who had lost everything in the floods, and Kennedy's words felt like a recognition of their suffering. Reporters in the gallery were in a frenzy, phones buzzing as newsrooms raced to cover the story. Cable news anchors interrupted segments to play the clip, voices tinged with admiration. "Senator John Kennedy just delivered a moment we haven't seen in Washington for years," one commentator said. For Kennedy, it was more than political theater, it was personal. He thought of Mary, the grandmother who had lost her grandson, her voice trembling as she sought answers no one could give. He remembered the countless others he had met in Louisiana, their faces marked by grief and resilience. They were not just statistics in a report, they were his people, and he would not allow their suffering to be used as a political tool. As the chamber slowly began to stir, senators murmuring to one another, Kennedy remained composed, mind alert, but demeanor steady. He knew this was only the beginning. Warren's attack had been a miscalculation, yet she remained a formidable opponent, backed by powerful allies who would not let this moment fade. The folder on his desk, handed to him by a trusted aide, contained more than notes. It held receipts, evidence, and truths capable of shaking Washington. But Kennedy did not open it. Not yet. He allowed the silence to do its work. Let Warren's stunned expression speak for itself. No follow-up could match it. The nation was watching, and for the first time in a long while, they heard a voice speaking not for power, but for them. As the gavel fell to adjourn the session, the chamber remained charged, the weight of Kennedy's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Warren gathered her papers, movements jerky, her face a mask of restrained shock. She avoided eye contact, her usual confidence replaced by a rare vulnerability, a glimpse of something human. Kennedy, on the other hand, stood and walked out steadily, heart heavy but resolute. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for Louisiana, for Mary, for every family overlooked in the floodwaters. With one sentence, he had captured the nation's attention. The echoes of the Senate chamber had barely faded when the country erupted. Kennedy's single line, "Senator Warren, where were you when the people of Louisiana were begging for help in the floodwaters while you were busy sipping wine at Georgetown dinner parties?" ignited a firestorm far beyond Washington's marble walls. News networks replayed the clip continuously, anchors dissecting every word, pause, and flicker of emotion on Warren's face. Social media platforms buzzed with activity. Hashtags like hashtag Kennedy slams, hashtag Warren, and hashtag Louisiana Truth climbing to the top of trending lists and amassing millions of views within hours. Ordinary Americans, truck drivers in Mobile, teachers in Shreveport, retirees in Baton Rouge, shared the video, comments filled with raw emotion. Finally, someone's calling out the elites, one user wrote. Kennedy just spoke for every small town left behind, another added. The real storm, however, was only beginning. Kennedy's words had triggered scrutiny of a deeper web of neglect and misdirection extending through the corridors of power. In the days following the confrontation, journalists from major outlets, from the New York Times to independent bloggers on X, examined Warren's record, searching for evidence to confirm or challenge Kennedy's claim. What they uncovered was damning. Public records showed that during the height of Louisiana's flood crisis, Warren had attended not one, but 4 high-profile fundraisers, 2 in Washington, D.C., 1 in New York City, and another in Boston. Photos surfaced online. Warren in a tailored suit, smiling at a Georgetown gala, clinking glasses with donors, while Louisiana families struggled through toxic floodwaters. Not a single statement from her office acknowledged the disaster during that critical period. The contrast was stark, and public anger was immediate. Posts on X erupted. She was drinking wine while our homes were underwater, one Louisiana resident wrote, attaching a photo of her ruined living room. Kennedy's right. She wasn't there. The revelations fueled a growing sense of betrayal, not only among Louisianans, but also among Americans who saw in Warren's absence a broader pattern of political neglect. In his Senate office, John Kennedy sat quietly, the weight of the moment pressing down. He was not one to seek the spotlight, despite his reputation for sharp, witty soundbites. The folder on his desk, handed to him by a trusted aide named Clara, contained more than notes. It held a report compiled by a whistleblower from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The document revealed that $1.8 million in disaster relief funds intended for Louisiana's infrastructure repairs had been quietly redirected to a cultural arts initiative in Massachusetts, a project linked to a nonprofit closely tied to one of Warren's major donors. Kennedy traced the edges of the folder, jaw tightening as he reread the figures. $1.8 million that could have repaired levees, restored water systems, or saved homes had been diverted to fund abstract sculptures in a city untouched by floods. He understood the implications of exposing this. It wasn't only about Warren. It was about a system that prioritized political favors over human lives. But Kennedy also knew he could not remain silent. Not now. Not after seeing the faces of Louisiana's people, their eyes hollow with grief, their hands calloused from rebuilding alone. He remembered Anna, a mother he met in a flooded parish, voice breaking as she recounted losing her teenage son to raging waters. He was trying to save our dog, she had told Kennedy, hands trembling. No one came to help us. He had knelt beside her, promising to fight for answers, and that promise burned in his chest. Now, the next Senate session was a powder keg waiting to ignite. As Kennedy took his seat, the chamber hummed with nervous energy. Senators whispered among themselves, glancing repeatedly between Kennedy and Warren, who sat rigid at her desk, her face a mask of controlled fury. The official agenda covered dry budget reviews and procedural votes, but Kennedy had other plans. When the floor opened for comments, he stood, holding the whistleblower's report in one hand, voice steady, yet carrying the weight of a man who had seen enough and was ready to act. "I'm not here to point fingers for sport," he began, his southern drawl cutting through the tension in the chamber. "But I want to know why $1.8 million meant for Louisiana families, clean water, safe homes, ended up funding statues in a state untouched by the floods." The chamber fell silent, a silence heavy enough to feel like the world was holding its breath. Warren's head snapped up, eyes narrowing, but Kennedy did not pause. "This isn't about politics," he continued, holding up the report. "This is about Anna, who buried her son because the levees failed. This is about families drinking bottled water because the pipes are still broken. This is about accountability." He set the report down, sweeping his gaze across the room, briefly meeting Warren's eyes before moving on. The impact was immediate. Senators shifted uneasily, some flipping through notes, others staring at their desks. Warren rose, voice sharp but unsteady. Senator Kennedy, these accusations are reckless and unfounded, she said, gripping her podium. I've dedicated my career to fighting for the vulnerable, and to suggest otherwise is a cheap political stunt. Her words lacked conviction, and the room sensed it. A few allies clapped, but the applause was weak, drowned out by murmurs of doubt. Reporters in the gallery were already typing headlines. Kennedy exposes misdirected disaster funds. Outside the chamber, the story spread rapidly. In Louisiana, community centers and churches became gathering points as residents watched live streams of the session on Warren TVs. Anna, the mother who had lost her son, sat in a folding chair at a local church, eyes fixed on the screen. When Kennedy mentioned her name, she covered her mouth, tears streaming. She whispered to a woman beside her, "He's fighting for us." A local journalist captured the moment on video, and it quickly went viral. "This is what leadership looks like," one commenter wrote. Kennedy isn't just talking, he's naming names. The public reaction extended far beyond Louisiana. Across the country, people shared their own stories of neglect, communities ignored after hurricanes, towns left to fend for themselves after wildfires. Kennedy's words tapped into widespread frustration, a sense that the system long favored the powerful over the powerless. On X, one user posted a photo of a flooded street in her neighborhood, captioning it, "This is my home. Where was Warren?" Thank you, Kennedy, for asking the question we've all been screaming. The post was retweeted thousands of times, each share amplifying the call for accountability. In Washington, Warren's team scrambled to manage the fallout. Senior aides huddled in a private office, voices low but urgent. "We need to get ahead of this," one said, flipping through a tablet. "The media is digging into the nonprofit. They've got names, dates, donor lists." Warren sat silently, pale, hands folded tightly in her lap. She knew the nonprofit, linked to a longtime supporter who had hosted the Georgetown fundraiser she attended during the floods. At the time, she had treated the fund redirection as a routine favor. Now, under Kennedy's spotlight, it looked like a betrayal. She tried to draft a statement denying direct involvement, but evidence mounted. Public records showed her office had signed off on the transfer, and emails uncovered by a reporter hinted at her awareness of the nonprofit's ties. The pressure was relentless, and even her closest allies began to distance themselves. Senator Margaret Holmes, a longtime friend, approached her after the session, voice low. "Elizabeth, you need to address this head-on," she said, eyes troubled. "The documents don't lie." Warren nodded, but her expression was hollow. Her usual fire was dimmed. The chamber was no longer a safe space for her. It had become a battlefield, and Kennedy had just shifted the balance. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a late-night session, as the Senate debated unrelated legislation, Senator Holmes stood, voice trembling but determined. "I've served alongside Senator Warren for years," she began carefully. "But the evidence presented today raises questions we cannot ignore. I move for an immediate investigation into the allocation of disaster relief funds linked to Senator Warren's office." The motion struck like a thunderclap. Senators gasped, heads turning toward Warren, who sat frozen, hands gripping her desk. The vote was called, and one by one, hands rose, Democrats and Republicans alike, faces grim. The motion passed with a two-thirds majority, a rare moment of bipartisan agreement. Warren's face went ashen, eyes fixed on the floor. As reality sank in, her career teetered on the edge. Outside, the nation watched, and the response was overwhelming. In Louisiana, a community center in New Orleans hosted a vigil for flood victims, where residents shared their stories. Anna, the mother who had lost her son, spoke to the crowd, voice steady despite her grief. "Senator Kennedy didn't just call out Warren," she said, holding a photo of her son. "He gave my boy a voice. He gave us all a voice." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers mingling with tears. A local pastor handed Anna a letter she had written to Kennedy after their meeting. "Read it to him," the pastor urged. "Let him know what it meant." The letter, simple yet raw, thanked Kennedy for remembering her son and for fighting for families like hers. It ended with a plea, "Don't stop. We're counting on you." Back in Washington, Kennedy received the letter late that night, delivered by Clara, his aide, whose eyes were red from crying. He read it slowly, letting each word settle in his heart. Anna's story was more than one tragedy. It symbolized countless others whose pain had been ignored, buried under bureaucratic red tape and political games. Kennedy folded the letter carefully, placing it in his desk drawer beside a small, worn photo of his own childhood home in Louisiana, a modest house that had once flooded. He wasn't fighting for headlines or applause. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for Anna, for her son, for every person told their suffering didn't matter. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of slowing. Newsrooms scrambled, reports growing more detailed as new evidence emerged. A leaked email from Warren's office, published by an independent journalist, confirmed her staff's awareness of the fund diversion. The nonprofit's board included a close friend of Warren's, a detail that sent shockwaves through the media. Talk shows debated the scandal, pundits calling it a wake-up call for Washington. For Kennedy, however, the fight was far from over. He knew the system was bigger than one senator or one scandal. The truths he had unveiled were only the beginning. As he looked out his office window at the Capitol dome glowing under the night sky, he felt the weight of what was to come. The folder on his desk held more secrets, more truths waiting to be told. And John Kennedy, with the quiet resolve of a man who had seen too much to back down, was ready to keep speaking. John Kennedy's words had done more than silence a room. They had ignited a movement for accountability. They had awakened a nation. Kennedy's single sentence, delivered with quiet authority, had not only humbled Senator Elizabeth Warren, but also sparked a movement that extended far beyond the marble walls of the Senate chamber. The nation was captivated, not by political drama, but by the honesty of a man speaking for those who often felt invisible. Television screens across the country glowed with Kennedy's face, his steady gaze and southern drawl replayed in living rooms from Louisiana to Montana. Talk shows paused their usual commentary to let the clip play in full, the silence following Warren's stunned expression resonating louder than any discussion. On social media, the hashtag Kennedy Speaks For Us trended for days, accumulating millions of posts, from tearful videos of flood survivors to heartfelt messages from people who had never met Kennedy but felt he had given them a voice. "I've never cared about politics," a nurse from Shreveport posted on X, "but when Kennedy called out Warren, I felt seen for the first time." The nation wasn't just witnessing a scandal, it was witnessing a reckoning, a moment when the forgotten demanded to be heard. Kennedy, however, did not seek the spotlight. While newsrooms clamored for interviews and pundits hailed him as a new kind of hero, he quietly slipped away from Washington, boarding a small plane to Louisiana. He did not announce the trip and invited no press. Instead, he arrived in Monroe, a small town still scarred by floodwaters that had yet to be fully remedied. In a community center lit by flickering fluorescent lights, Kennedy sat on a folding chair surrounded by residents who had lost homes, businesses, and loved ones. He listened intently as a fisherman named Tom described how the floods had destroyed his boat, his sole source of income. He nodded as a grandmother named Ada explained how she had to bathe her grandchildren with bottled water because the pipes still carried silt. These were not sound bites for a campaign. They were stories Kennedy carried like stones in his chest, each one a reminder of why he had spoken out. "I'm not here to make promises I can't keep," he told the crowd, voice soft but firm. "I'm here to make sure your voices don't get drowned out again." The room erupted in applause. They were not polite Washington residents. They were the raw, grateful kind of people who had been ignored for too long. Back in the Capitol, Elizabeth Warren struggled with the fallout. The Senate's vote to investigate her office's handling of disaster funds had sent shockwaves through her inner circle. Once loyal allies were now scarce, their seats empty. Strategy meetings went unanswered, phones silent. In a dimly lit office, Warren sat alone, staring at a draft statement on her laptop. Her words were carefully chosen, admitting no direct fault but acknowledging oversights in her office's decisions. "I believed I was serving the greater good," she wrote. "But I see now that my actions caused pain to those I intended to help." The statement was brief, almost hollow. When she delivered it to a small group of reporters outside the Capitol, her voice lacked its usual fire. Cameras captured a woman who seemed smaller, not defeated, but diminished, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up. Headlines were merciless. Warren steps down from key committees amid scandal. Kennedy's truth forces reckoning. Yet even as her career faltered, Warren's final words surprised many. "I don't agree with Senator Kennedy's methods, but I respect his commitment to his people." A rare moment of humility, one that left even critics pausing to reflect. The impact of Kennedy's stand reached far beyond one senator's downfall. In Louisiana, community organizers mobilized. Inspired by his example, a group called Voices of the Flood, formed by survivors, launched a campaign to hold elected officials accountable for disaster relief funds. They printed T-shirts with Kennedy's sentence, "Where were you when the people of Louisiana were begging for help?" and wore them at rallies. Their message was clear: no more excuses, no more forgotten towns. Schools across the state incorporated the Senate confrontation into civics lessons. Teachers used the video to spark discussions about integrity and public service. In one Baton Rouge classroom, a shy 10-year-old student named Lily, whose family had lost their home in the floods, raised her hand. "Senator Kennedy made me think we matter," she said, her voice trembling. After class, she spent hours drawing Kennedy standing before a crowd, a simple sign above him reading, "You spoke for us." Her teacher mailed the drawing to Kennedy's office. When it arrived, he paused, throat tightening as he read the attached note. "My mom says, you're the first person who cared enough to fight." He hung the drawing on his office wall, a quiet reminder of the stakes. The movement was not limited to Louisiana. Across the country, people saw Kennedy's stand as a call to action. In Ohio, a factory worker posted a video holding a bottle of contaminated water, saying, "If Kennedy can fight for Louisiana, who's fighting for us?" In California, wildfire survivors echoed the sentiment, demanding transparency in relief spending. Pastors in small-town churches played Kennedy's speech during services, framing it as a lesson in standing up for what's right. Even late-night hosts, usually quick to mock, treated the moment with reverence. One said simply, "This is what it looks like when someone remembers who they work for." The groundswell wasn't about party lines. It was about a shared hunger for leaders who saw the people, not just the power. Kennedy felt the weight of this responsibility. Late one evening, after returning from Monroe, he sat in his D.C. office, the city quiet outside his window. A stack of letters had arrived, hundreds of them from all corners of the country. A farmer in Iowa wrote about losing his crops to floods, thanking Kennedy for hope. A nurse in Texas shared how her hospital had run out of supplies during a hurricane, praising Kennedy for speaking truth to power. Each letter was a thread in a tapestry of pain and resilience, and Kennedy read them with eyes stinging. One letter from a retired teacher named Clara in New Orleans stood out. "My husband worked his whole life to build our home," she wrote in shaky handwriting, "and the floods took it. But when you spoke, I felt like we weren't forgotten anymore." Kennedy folded the letter carefully, placing it beside Lily's drawing. He wasn't chasing fame or victory. He was chasing justice, knowing the fight was far from over. When Kennedy returned to the Senate chamber, the air was different. There was a new respect, not just for him, but for what he represented. Senators who had once dismissed him as a quirky Southerner now nodded as he passed. Even those who disagreed with his politics couldn't deny the impact of his stand. During a quiet moment before a vote, Senator James Rowley, a longtime moderate, approached him. "John," he said softly, "I've been here 20 years, and I've never seen someone shift the conversation like you did. You didn't just call out Warren, you called out all of us." Kennedy nodded, offering a small smile. "It's not about me, Jim," he said. "It's about them." He didn't need to clarify who they were. The people of Louisiana, the people of America, the ones who had been left behind. The legacy of Kennedy's sentence grew stronger with each passing day. News outlets began investigating other instances of misallocated relief funds, uncovering patterns that reached beyond Warren's office. Grassroots campaigns sprang up, demanding audits of disaster spending nationwide. In Washington, a bipartisan group of senators proposed a new oversight committee to ensure relief funds reached those who needed them most. A move Kennedy quietly supported. But for him, the real work was back home. At a town hall in Lake Charles, Kennedy stood before a packed gymnasium. No podium, no script, just a man and his people. After the session, a young girl approached him, clutching a folded piece of paper. It was Lily, the girl who had drawn the picture. "I wanted to give you this in person," she said, handing him a new drawing. Kennedy, surrounded by families with hands raised in gratitude, knelt down, his voice catching. "Lily, this means more than you know," he said. "You keep drawing, and I'll keep fighting." As he stood, the crowd cheered, not for a politician, but for a man who had reminded them that their voices mattered. Meanwhile, in Washington, Warren's office grew quieter. Her statement had done little to quell the storm. As investigations deepened, more revelations emerged: meetings with donors, emails about fund reallocations, a trail of decisions that painted a clear picture of neglect. She avoided the Senate floor, her once commanding presence replaced by a shadow of regret. One evening, alone in her office, she watched a news segment featuring Kennedy at the Lake Charles Town Hall. She saw Lily hand him the drawing, saw the tears in his eyes. For a moment, Warren's own eyes welled up, not for lost influence, but at the realization of how far she had strayed from the people she once vowed to serve. Kennedy's sentence had done more than expose her. It held a mirror to her choices, and the reflection was stark. Across the nation, the story of that sentence became a touchstone. It wasn't just about one senator or one scandal. It was about a system that had forgotten its purpose. Kennedy's office received thousands of messages, letters, drawings, even a quilt from a Louisiana sewing circle, each square embroidered with a story of loss and hope. A veteran in Mississippi wrote, "I've never trusted politicians, but you, Senator, you're one of us." A single mother in Florida sent a photo of her children holding a sign. "Thank you, Kennedy, for fighting for the little guy." These weren't just messages. They were a mandate, a reminder that the fight for truth was bigger than any one man. One night, Kennedy stood at his office window, the Capitol dome glowing in the distance. He held Lily's drawing in one hand, Clara's letter in the other. The weight of their trust was heavy, but it also fueled him to keep going. He hadn't planned to start a movement, but he had sparked one, and America was ready to fight for change. The sentence that had humbled Warren was not just a moment. It was a promise Kennedy intended to keep for Lily, for Clara, and for every voice that had been silenced too long.